feature enabled today. If you have a question, please submit it using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. Questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. Closed captioning is also available. You can request closed captioning using the button on the bottom right of your screen. Next slide, please. So let's go over what to expect today. We're going to go over 2024 election changes, candidate filing, planning for elected officials, Multnomah County elections, and then time for questions. Oops. After that short break, we're going to have city campaign finance doing a presentation for you, small donor elections, Oristar and the state. More time for questions then. Plenty of time for questions built into all of this. Okay, and with that, we're going to get things started with 2024 election changes. And so I'm going to hand it over to James Eccles, who is an elections analyst with the City of Portland Elections Office. It's all you, James.
Thank you so much, Leah. So I want to start off by talking about the City of Portland Elections Office first, and then I will jump into our changes. The Portland City Elections Office is housed in the City Auditor's Office, and we have a number of functions directly and indirectly related to the administration of city elections. Our primary roles include city candidate filing, city code and administrative rules, certification of election results, the regulation of city campaign finance, lobbying, and political consultants, and finally, a new mandate out of the city charter to perform voter education. It is also vitally important to understand what our office is not. We are not a source of legal advice. We recommend seeking your own legal counsel if you have those types of questions. We are a nonpartisan office and will never endorse or support specific candidates or parties. We do not produce, distribute, or count your ballots. That is done by the counties in which you are running. But we did write the election code, which determines how those ballots will be counted for city candidates. And finally, we do not handle voter registration, but our office is more than happy to direct you to where you can register to vote. Today, we'll discuss 3 major changes that directly impact you as candidates. For additional impacts beyond what I'll talk about, I recommend checking out the City Transition Team's website, and Tate White of the Transition Team will be up here later to discuss some of those changes. My colleague in elections, Tony Canales, will be up after me to talk more about filing and the offices that will be on the ballot. For my part, I will discuss the implementation of electoral districts for the first time in Portland, and then look at the changes to how we vote in Portland, moving to ranked choice voting. We will begin with the new districts. You can go to the next slide. Here you can see the final map that the Independent Districts Commission landed on. If you're interested in running for mayor or auditor, all 4 districts will be voting in your contest. But if you're running for city council, only those voters registered in your district will see you on their ballot. The districts are all roughly equal in population, and for any more detail on how the commission arrived at this map, I highly recommend you check out their website or go to ours at Portland.Gov/vote. One of the key differences in the districts is the initial terms of office and when you will need to run for re-election. District 1, District 2, and the mayor will always appear on the ballot during a presidential election year, so those offices will be up for re-election in 2028 and every 4 years after. For District 3, District 4, and the auditor, things start out a bit different. These offices will be up for re-election in 2026 and then every 4 years after during the midterm elections. This means that if elected to District 3, 4, or as the auditor, your first term of office is only going to be 2 years, and then you will settle into a normal rotation. This is done for the purpose of creating staggered elections so that every office is not being re-elected all at the same time. The voter experience will change very little from one district to another. Every voter will see 3 contests on their ballot in 2024, mayor, auditor, and the contest for council in the district they reside in. After that, every voter will see either 1 contest for mayor or 1 contest for auditor, and if their district is up for re-election that year, they'll have 1 additional contest on their ballot. Our recommendation is that if you are ever unsure, that you should use the amazing tool at portlandmaps.com. This can tell you exactly what districts you're in and give you a detailed map of the area. Another important change in 2024, we will now discuss the implementation of ranked choice voting. You can see up on the screen a QR code. if you're able to, scanning this now will take you to a mock RCV election. A link to the mock election should also be appearing in the chat for everyone. Please feel free to weigh in on your favorite flavor of ice cream, a vitally important election, and then I will return to discuss how our ice creams fared in a minute. Don't worry, I promise that this election will not result in pistachio ice cream running the Water Bureau. But first, a quick overview. We have big changes in Portland, and we wanted to enlist your help in educating voters on those changes. You, as candidates, have a vested interest in making sure that Portlanders understand how to vote for you. And, quite frankly, you will have far more direct face time with voters than we ever will. The better you understand our voting system, the better everyone you talk to is likely to understand it. I will discuss two systems of ranked choice voting that we will be using for the election. The first results in a single winner and is being used to elect the mayor and auditor in citywide contests. The second results in multiple winners, in our case 3, and is being used to elect 3 councilors from each district through a single contest per district. It is important to understand that for the voter, there's no difference in how they interact with the ballot between these two methods. Either way, they will have a list of candidates for that office, and they will be able to rank up to 6 of those candidates. If they only want to vote for a single candidate, they are welcome to just rank one person as their first choice. However, we do recommend using all 6 of your rankings, and I'll get to the advantage of doing so in a moment. Briefly, I also want to highlight a potential cause of confusion for voters. You may have heard that a ballot measure for statewide ranked choice voting is going to be on the same November ballot that you all are planning to be on. This has the potential for additional misinformation or misunderstandings around what will be happening in November. So I recommend you try to be very clear and precise with your voters about what you are talking about. Now here, we have a demonstration of what the ballot may look like. The counties are still finalizing their work on this, but this image can give you an accurate representation of what to expect. Shown here on this ballot for mayor, you can see 6 rankings across the top and each candidate listed along the side, including a write-in line. Although filled out very simply, this demonstrates proper filling out of this grid-style ballot. In our experience, most people find it pretty intuitive, but we want to do our best to eliminate any potential mistakes when filling out the ballot. As long as you only fill in one oval per column and row, as shown here, you will be good. And now we can return to our ice cream flavors. If you haven't voted yet, do so now, because we are about to find out which flavor of ice cream you all scream for. Yes, the dad jokes are going to keep coming. The platform that we use, that you can see here, is known as Ranked Vote. It is not an exact recreation of how your ballots will be tabulated, but we have found it to be an incredible educational tool for people to experience ranked choice voting firsthand. We can see our grid-style ballot here, and now I need to think about which ice cream flavor I really love. Just like with candidates, our office in no way endorses any flavor of ice cream above any other. But for today's purpose, I will fill in what I think are the best choices. As you can see, I can only give my first ranking to a single flavor. In your real ballot, if you try to rank multiple candidates as your first choice, none of those candidates will be counted. When tabulating this particular ballot, we simply have no way of determining a voter's intent. We also cannot rank a flavor as our first, second, and third choices, no matter how much we love them. If you do this on your November ballot, we will accept the first ranking, but every ranking after that would be wasted. Finally, this platform won't let us skip over a ranking. If you were to do this on your November ballot, we treat the skipped ranking as if it never happened, and your choices are compressed, just as you can see happening here. Always remember, one choice per column and row, and you cannot go wrong. Now, as each of you have hopefully done, I will submit this ballot and we can see our results. Now you can see at the top that chocolate won the day, but let's take a look at how they got there. Next to our winner, we see that 60 of 118 votes was needed to win, which matches our 50% plus 1 threshold. Now, as we go down and look at the rounds, we can see that in round 1, nobody got over the threshold. Nobody got to that majority. So the first thing we'll do is eliminate cookie dough as the lowest vote getter. When we go to round 2, we see that their votes are reapportioned to all the other candidates based on the second choice ballots that were given to cookie dough. Again, we didn't get to a winner, so again, we remove birthday cake, and we see the same thing happening in round 3. We'll continue in round 4 with strawberry sherbet, in round 5 with butter pecan, and finally in round 6 with vanilla. Now we're getting pretty close and we're down to the last 3 candidates, but we still haven't crossed that threshold of those 60 votes that we need to get to. We'll see that pistachio is our lowest vote getter, so they will finally be eliminated. And in round 7, we will see that chocolate comes out to win the day, getting enough votes to win the election. And you may or may not like chocolate, but the majority of people who have taken this election did choose chocolate, so that's what wins the day. And that's single winner ranked choice voting. As I said, the voter has the same experience with the ballot for multi-winner ranked choice voting, but there are some differences in how we calculate those votes. The first is that since we need 3 winners, we can't use our 50% plus 1 majority to determine those winners, because obviously only one person can get over 50%. Instead, we use 25% plus 1 as our threshold. This allows 3 winners to get over that threshold, but makes it impossible for 4 people to do so. This also ensures that together, those 3 candidates will hold over 75% of the votes from that district. And this is why we describe this method as arriving at the 3 winners with the greatest amount of support. Just as in single winner, if we don't have all 3 winners in the first round, we eliminate the candidate in last place and redistribute their votes. Different from single winner, we also redistribute votes from the winners if they get more than they needed to win. If we didn't do this, you could end up with one incredibly popular candidate getting 80% of the vote in the first round, and then your other 2 winners would be splitting the remaining 20% between them and would never get over that 25% threshold. On this slide, you can see a very simple multi-winner election playing out, but let's return to our ice cream to see how they fare with a multi-winner election. As you can see, once we switch over, the ballot looks exactly the same. In fact, this is the same election that you've already voted in. I just changed the algorithm from single to multi-winner. All of the do's and don'ts remain the same, so we will jump ahead to see our results. Now, once we get to the results, you will notice some differences. The first obvious one being that we have 3 winners listed at the top with chocolate, mint chocolate chip, and pistachio. You can also see that we now need 30 out of 119 votes to win, which matches our 25% plus 1 threshold in a multi-winner election. As we look down, we see that just as in with single winner, in round 1, nobody got enough votes to be elected. So we remove the lowest vote getters, and then we will reapportion their votes. Now in this tool, you'll see that it actually eliminated cookie dough and birthday cake at the same time. But when your ballot is tabulated in November, we'll actually do it one at a time. So birthday cake would be eliminated, and then cookie dough would be eliminated after that. In this case, we simply truncate the rounds and do it at the same time. Here, you'll see that chocolate now got over the 30 vote threshold, and they have 31 votes. That means that 1 vote will now need to be reapportioned to others. So if we go to round 3, we'll see the proportional 1 vote move to mint chocolate chip. Now we move forward to our 4th round because nobody else gets over the threshold, eliminating strawberry sherbet, just like in our single winner. Again, we'll remove butter pecan in this round to redo their votes. And now we see that we got a 2nd winner, mint chocolate chip. And again, they're over the threshold. So in round 6, we'll reallocate those votes and enough go to pistachio to put them over the threshold. And we have our 3 winners in round 6, chocolate, mint chocolate chip, and pistachio. Now, again, if these aren't the ones you voted for, that's understandable, but these are the 3 that got 75% of the total votes from this contest. That's multi-winner ranked choice voting. Now, moving back to our slides, we can see that that is all I have for ranked choice voting, but please make sure to write any questions you had down so that we can clarify or correct anything said here today. The last thing I will cover here before passing things off to our other speakers is an important resource that the city launched both for you and for your voters. This is our new landing page for the Portland City 2024 general election. The URL is straightforward, just Portland.Gov/VOTE, vote. The page will cover all the changes I just discussed in greater detail and connect you with additional resources and materials if you really want to do a deep dive, including other access to other mock elections like the one you hopefully voted in today so you can get more practice. I'll now pass things back to Leah to move on with our presentation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, James, and thanks for walking us through that mock election. Because I respect democracy, I am great with chocolate being the single winner, though personally I would have gone with mint chocolate chip. With that, though, let me pass it off to Tony Canales, who is an elections analyst, also with the City of Portland Elections Office. Tony, it's all you.
Thanks, Leah. Hello, everyone. My name is Tony Canales, and I will be giving you a broad overview of the candidate filing process. Things such as like important dates, forms, and just overall processes related to the candidate filing process. The offices that will be up for election this November are mayor, city council positions from District 1, 2, 3, and 4, and city auditor. The main difference this election, as James mentioned before, is that all positions will be on the ballot, and districts 3 and 4 and city auditor will be 2-year terms, which will be up for election again in 2026 to get back on the normal 4-year election cycle. Qualifications. All city elected officials must be citizens of the United States of America. They must be residents of the city of Portland. They must be a registered voter in the city of Portland and lived in the electoral district since November 5th, 2023. So that's the year requirement from the date of the election, which is November 5th, 2024. Electoral district means something different for the positions. For city auditor, mayor, that means just living in the city of Portland. And for the city council, that means living in a specific district that they're running in. This graphics are election city calendar, so it's the graphic to the right there. There's a lot of dates on here, but the ones that are important to those filing for office are that the filing window, the first day to file, is June 5th, 2024. The last day to file is August 27th, 2024. And the last day to have your name removed from the ballot, if you choose not to want to run anymore, is August 30th, 2024. And that's the last day you also get any refunded fees that you may have paid. If you do not withdraw by that date, your name will still appear on the ballot if you've been qualified for it. The last date that I like to call out is the September 9th optional voters pamphlet deadline, and that's of course September 9th, and that's put on by the counties, but I'd like to point that out just because there's going to be so many candidates that are going to be doing this, and it's advisable to keep in touch with the counties to see what you need to make that process go smoother, and they'll be talking about this later in the presentation. There are 2 options for filing for office. The first option is declaration of candidacy. And with that, you will be filling out the AUD 120 filing application, which is available online, so electronically on our website, or if needed, through a PDF format, so you can print it and either mail it to us, scan it to us, whatever. It's a fillable PDF. The filing fees for mayor and auditor are $100. City council is $75. You can pay by exact cash, so exactly $100 or exactly $75, as we don't keep change at our office. So please keep that in mind. We do accept checks, and we do have an online payment portal that accepts credit, debit, or also electronic check. Also, for those with economic hardships, we do have a fee waiver available. This is a little different in that it needs to be submitted prior to filling out the filing application. So it must be submitted, approved, and then you can fill out the filing application to run for office. Eligibility is based on economic hardship, which is detailed on the form itself, and you will be informed in writing of your qualification to use that method of filing for office. The second option is nominating petition. And again, you'll need to fill out the AUD 120 filing application online or PDF. You'll have to submit a proposed signature sheet, the SEL 121, with your application. And that application gets approved so you can collect the signatures required to run for office. Each office requires 500 signatures to qualify for the ballot. We do recommend that you try to collect 600, and that just accounts for any signatures that might be rejected. So that 100 more than the 500 required gives you that little buffer in case anything goes wrong with the signatures you have collected. When you do turn in your signatures, you will need to also submit a petition submission form, an SCL 338, and we'll have links to all of this on our website too. And you'll need to make an appointment to turn those in. We do recommend doing this as early as possible, as it'll take us some time to verify 500 signatures, and it gives you time, if you don't meet the 500 threshold, to go back and collect more, as you do have as many tries as you can before the deadline to collect the 500 signatures required to get on the ballot. Next. For those visual learners such as myself, shows you the path for each option. As you can see, the first filing option, if you choose to submit the fee waiver, you would do that first, then you would do the application, and then turn it into us to be qualified. Or if you skip that, just pay the filing fee along with the application. Option 2, as you can see there, you'll submit the application along with the SCL 121 form. Then you would get approval, look over any requirements for collecting signatures, gather the signatures, submit the signatures with the petition sheet by appointment, and then you'll be qualified for the ballot by us. We'll look over to make sure you're qualified for the ballot. When everything has been turned into us, we do an initial review of the forms given to us. So those would be any fee waivers, any safety exemptions, or residence address exemptions. We check your qualifications, such as whether you're registered to vote, how long you've lived at the address that you live at, and then we of course check any signatures if you're filing by nominating petition, and that does take some time, so please do it as early as possible. It's important to know that if we need additional documentation, we will request it. Any signatures that if you do meet the signature threshold, we will ask you to collect more. All filings and all materials must be submitted by the deadline. And again, I keep harping on this just because it's really important to do in case anything goes wrong. Try to do it as early in the process as possible. This year we have a little differences in options for candidates that need to keep their address or want to keep their address from being publicly posted. The Oregon legislature recently passed a law allowing candidates running for office to exempt their address from being posted publicly. And for us, that means we do post filing application, candidates filing application once they've been qualified to the ballot on our website. And so a person would fill out this request with the Secretary of State's office. We would get that request, then we would redact the address before posting it on the website. Again, this is optional, but this is an option for those people that choose to go that route. What it doesn't do is exempt a candidate from a public records request. If someone were to do a public records request, we would still be required to give the requester the unredacted version of that filing application. The city does have a public record safety exemption. This requires a higher burden of proof, such as police reports or any other evidence that a person has a personal safety concern. So you would have to prove that you do have that concern. If you do choose to go that route, please email us, and then we'll get you that form and show you just the process of doing that. And finally, for those candidates that are choosing to do a write-in campaign, that is an option. Only you would have to fill out a write-in certification form to be a certified write-in candidate for the ballot. The deadline to do this is 7 days before the election, which is October 29th. It's all the same qualifications as a candidate who's filed. And it is important to know that even though a person is a write-in candidate, they are still subject to the same campaign finance regulations as filed candidates. And so that's the filing process in a nutshell. If you have any questions, please email us and we'll try to get them answered. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. A reminder, there is a space for questions during this session. You can put your questions in the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your screen. Thank you to the person who got that going by putting an initial question in there. We'll make sure to get to those throughout the session. But for now, I'm going to pass it over to Tate White, who is a strategic projects manager with the transition team at the City of Portland. So Tate, it's all you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Leah. Again, my name is Tate White. I use she, they pronouns, and I won't repeat my title because Leah did it so well. So I presented earlier this year at the first round of candidate learning sessions, and I introduced the work the transition team is doing related to election methods and governance. I focused on the shifting roles and responsibilities of elected officials in the mayor-council form of government that will be in place starting 2025. For this round, I'm instead going to focus more on planning that we are doing to support the incoming elected officials. Next slide. Thank you. As a quick reminder, Portlanders voted to change city government in 3 significant ways back in November 2022. First, allowing voters to rank candidates in order of their preference using ranked choice voting. You've already heard about that today. Second, creating 4 new geographic districts with 3 members elected to represent each district, expanding the city council to a total of 12 members. And third, replacing our current commission form of government with a city council that focuses on setting policy and a mayor elected citywide to run the city's day-to-day operations with the help of a professional city administrator. These charter changes are intended to help our government work better for everyone and be more effective, accountable, and representative of every area of our city. Visit Portland.Gov/transition to learn more. So the next slide is going to show us a timeline of activities happening during the upcoming fiscal year, which bridges both forms of government. This spring, 2024, we expect political and voter education campaigns to be underway. Voter education is starting to really ramp up as of this week. This summer, City Council will adopt the budget that will include the first 6 months of the mayor-council form of government. In November 2024, Portland will elect a mayor, auditor, and council members using ranked choice voting. Planning is underway for briefing materials and sessions for onboarding in December, with continued support, tours, and sessions for the first 3 to 6 months of 2025. The mayor and city councilors will enter office on January 1st, 2025, into this new form of government's roles and responsibilities, new for Portland, that is. The council will hold their first meeting on January 2nd, 2025, and elect a council president and vice president. Recruitment plans are already being developed for the city administrator, so the mayor can hit the ground running. Initial work of both the mayor and council will be focused on understanding the budget, with the mayor getting involved early in the year to propose by early May, and the council deliberating on the budget moving into the early summer. Onboarding efforts will work towards providing the mayor and council with the fundamental knowledge they need to understand and consider the budget, along with other time-sensitive priorities that have already been in progress, including the Office of Government Relations legislative agenda. So on the next slide is an updated diagram of initial staffing to support the elected officials under the mayor-council form of government. The mayor and council will be full-time city employees, and their salaries were set by a salary commission last year, I mean. The slide shows the positions that have been included in the approved budget for partial or full years for fiscal year 2024 to 2025, depending on when they will start. A shared staffing group shown in gray provides additional, more permanent staff to support a sustainable and effective legislative process, including supporting the work of council committees. The council operations manager will be hired late summer or early fall to start building their team and prepare for welcoming the newly elected officials. Next slide, please. As we've discussed, these counselors will no longer directly oversee city bureaus and instead focus on setting policies to achieve desired community outcomes. The community will want to engage council to highlight a pattern of issues or encourage budget allocations to support their priorities for the city. As you can see on the left of the slide, council committees and regular meetings will be key, but we also anticipate individual and district offices may want to host their own meetings, events, or town halls. Starting in January 2025, the mayor will no longer serve on council. Instead, they will lead the executive branch and have administrative authority. The mayor and city administrator will work together to implement the laws and policies developed by council and will manage all city bureaus. The right side of the slide highlights the best ways to engage this executive branch. The community should focus on reaching out to the mayor about service delivery questions and improvements. Next slide, please. I mentioned council committees on the previous slide, so I want to clarify what exactly that means. The city has many committees, including advisory committees that members of the public serve on, and internal technical committees made up of staff. Council committees are small groups of counselors assigned to closely examine policy matters relating to specific topics or themes. These types of committees are common in other cities and are important for supporting more robust and focused public discussion in the legislative process. Next slide, please. This slide will show a high-level breakdown of Portland's policy process into 3 phases and starts to show how we expect it to change with a legislative focused council and the addition of committees. The order and existence of these phases is generally the same as what we have today, but the opportunities for greater transparency and public input will increase in phases 1 and 3. The first phase of identifying policy need is what naturally occurs when local government is problem solving or needs to respond to external factors, whether that be community input or new laws or requirements from partner agencies or something else. The second phase is largely internal, and it's a legal and procedural process to refine policy options often. Phase 3 represents the discussion that council goes through in public meetings. The number of public meetings will increase with the addition of these council committee meetings. These council committee meetings can expand the opportunities for the public to get involved in the issues that they care about most. Gold talk bubbles highlight key opportunities for the community to provide input in this policy process. I recommend you watch the recordings from our March community listening sessions to see a more detailed presentation on each of these phases, along with the work and evolving recommendations of the Government Transition Advisory Committee, or GTAC. The GTAC has refined their recommendations and will be going out to the community again this summer to share their work and gather more feedback. Next slide, please. Parallel to the community engagement work of the GTAC, a council operations work group at the city is developing draft council rules and procedures that outline more details about council duties, the legislative process, and committee meetings. This document has integrated best practices from peer cities as well as internal and external feedback. It will continue to be updated as we learn more through our various processes and community engagement. As you can see on the slide, we plan to release these proposed rules and procedures for public comment at the end of the summer. Revisions based on this feedback will be incorporated into a version that is shared with the counselors-elect through the onboarding process. The slide shows key dates for other efforts underway to support the success of the city's first ranked choice voting election in the mayor-council form of government. So I'm just going to end with a preview of our onboarding planning for the first couple of months post the election. Because it could be several weeks before we know all of the election results, we will start the onboarding sessions in December. But I want to note that as results do become available, the city administrator and council operations manager will be reaching out to the newly elected officials to introduce themselves and answer questions. Next slide, please. And then, as I said, we'll really start getting going in December and are planning for more evening and Saturday sessions with the assumption that some of the newly elected officials may be winding down existing employment or other obligations before taking office in January. We will start with some employee orientation and benefit sessions and an in-person welcome orientation on the first Saturday in December. Sorry, I think we're still on the previous slide, where the newly elected officials can start building relationships with each other as they learn about their roles and responsibilities. I just want everyone to see this calendar in particular. Key positions that they'll be working with, those folks will also be part of that Saturday session so they can meet each other, and then other foundational information and activities will happen that day. The newly elected officials will receive briefing booklets with comprehensive information about how the city functions and key policy priorities. The second week in December will include in-person sessions about legal requirements to serve as an elected official in Oregon and other fundamental information. Starting that week and leading into the next, there will also be sessions on council operations and procedures, focusing on the legislative process, the council rules and procedures recommendations, and other fundamental information about serving Portland as a counselor with a focus on policy and connecting with community. A joint public swearing-in ceremony is being planned for December 19th to be effective January 1st and get ahead of the Christmas holiday. All right, now we're ready for January. So onboarding will continue through January and likely several months after that, but simultaneous to meetings about council and city priorities, since the newly elected officials are in office and need to meet to make decisions. At their first meeting on January 2nd, the council will elect a council president and vice president as their first order of business. In the first week, communications and 311 staff will be available to overview the communication tools and resources available for the elected officials, and topic-specific sessions and tours will continue through January and beyond. All right, that wraps up my portion of the presentation. Thank you all for your attention. And in this next slide, you can see our email address for the charter transition team. If you have any questions, that's the best way to reach someone. And then our website address to see what you can find on our website, because we continue to have more information on there. All right, thank you. Handing it back to Leah.
Thank you, Tate. Just a reminder, you can continue to put your questions in the Q&A feature. We are tracking them, and after this next presentation, we'll have some space for answering questions. Also, for folks who might be wondering, we will be supplying the slides from this presentation for you to view, so you don't have to take perfect notes as we go. And with that, I am going to hand it over to our next presenters, who are from Multnomah County Elections. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, Kali Odell, who is an elections and district and candidate specialist, and to Edward Gutierrez, who's the communications coordinator here at Multnomah County Elections. Kali and Edward, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Leah. I'm going to start off by talking about the county voters pamphlet, which Tony Canales was mentioning a little bit earlier. And then I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Edward to talk about another way that you'll interact with Multnomah County elections around results reporting after the election happens. So, like I said, I'm going to begin by talking about the voters pamphlet if we want to skip to the next slide. Hopefully, most of you are experienced with the voters pamphlet from your own voting experiences. This is something that we send out to every household in the county, and it's received generally a few weeks before the election and before voters get their ballots. As Tony mentioned, it is optional for candidates to be in the county voters pamphlet, but since most candidates who are in contested races choose to file to be in the pamphlet, we wanted to talk a little bit about how that process works. So to appear in the county voters pamphlet, you as a candidate would need to submit a separate filing and filing fee to the county elections division. So that's not to the city of Portland elections office, which is where you submit your candidate filing, but to Multnomah County elections division. And then also, because Portland is lucky enough to be in 3 counties, Multnomah County, Washington County, and Clackamas County, each county has its own voters pamphlet. We do use the same forms and we accept the same materials. So you have the option to make copies of voter pamphlet materials. But candidates who are running at large throughout the city of Portland and candidates who are running in districts that are in multiple counties will need to submit separate filings and separate filing fees to each county that you want to appear in their voters pamphlet. And I've outlined on this slide which districts are in which counties and also what the fees will be for each county to appear in their voters pamphlet. All candidates will have to pay a $300 filing fee for the Multnomah County voters pamphlet, since that's where most of the city of Portland voters are registered to vote. The other thing that I want to note is the filing period for the voters pamphlet. We don't accept filings from city candidates until after the candidate filing deadline on August 27th, so that we have a list of certified candidates who are filed to run for office. But then the deadline for the voters pamphlet filing and all of the voters pamphlet materials is 5 p.m. on September 9th. So we have to have received filing fee and all voters pamphlet filing materials in order for you to appear in the voters pamphlet. And then finally, I just want to mention before we get into more details that we do accept filing forms electronically via email if you don't want to come and file in person in our office. And there's also an option to pay over the phone with a credit or debit card. I believe Clackamas and Washington counties also has similar options, but you'll want to check with them before the filing deadline to make sure that you know how to file with each county office if you are filing in multiple counties. Let's go to the next slide. So I don't have time to get into all of the details about voters pamphlet filings today, but I am going to give you some a high-level overview and then provide a couple of tips that will hopefully set you up for success when you're ready to submit your filing. So to begin with, I've included on this slide a link to where you can find the voters pamphlet filing forms on our website. I did just want to let you know that we may be making some updates to these forms that will affect formatting and clarity of instructions. So this is what the form currently looks like, but it may look a little bit different by the time you actually are ready to file. This first page is the required form. The first page on the left is the required form that you will have to submit. It is called the Joint County Voters Pamphlet Candidate Statement Form, or the JCVP-01. We have to have a signed copy of this form at our office in order for you to appear in the voters pamphlet. And then it also has to be accompanied by the information that we require all candidates to submit for the voters pamphlet, which are your name, your occupation, occupational background, educational background, and prior governmental experience. So that's the minimum information that needs to be provided in order to appear in the pamphlet. If you don't have experience in some of those areas, there has to be some text accompanying each category. So you may put information like none or not applicable. Other things that people commonly include in their voters pamphlet materials are a photo, which I've kind of highlighted on the right side of the screen. This is a finished version of what you'll see in the voters pamphlet. We don't expect you to turn everything in formatted exactly in this column feature, and usually your photo is submitted as a separate document and we format that in, but this just gives you a picture of what it looks like in the voters pamphlet. Other pieces that people commonly include are the optional statement section, which is an opportunity for candidates to talk about their experience, their positions, or include this other section, which is optional endorsements. So if you wanted to share that certain people or organizations are supporting you and have endorsed you for this election, a lot of people choose to include that in their voters pamphlet statement as well. And I'm going to talk more about how that part of the process works in just a second. Can we go to the next slide? Well, before we talk about endorsements, I did want to share just a little bit of an overview of some of the requirements. Unfortunately, I don't have time to get into all of the requirements today, so I highly recommend that you review the form early. There are detailed instructions attached to the form that lay out all the voter pamphlet requirements and rules. And so carefully reviewing them, reviewing those instructions will help you in your planning process. But something that's very important to know about submitting your candidate statement for the voters pamphlet is that the entire statement is limited to 325 words. And the only words that we don't include in that are the headings for the required statements. So that's your name, your occupation, occupational background, etc. That does not count toward the word count. But the optional statement and the information that you include in the required sections does count towards that word count. And I did just want to highlight a few areas for you because this is one of the biggest issues that comes up when people are submitting their voters pamphlet materials, is that if you submit more than 325 words, if we receive your statement before the deadline and are able to review and identify a word count issue, we'll do our very best to reach out and give you a chance to amend your statement so it's within the required word limit. But if you aren't able to amend your form or end up in a position where you've been able to limit it to 325 words, maybe you turned your pamphlet filing in right before the deadline, we do cut off any additional words. So it's really important to take into consideration how you can best make sure you're meeting that word limit. The one thing that trips people up the most often is hyphenated words. We count most hyphenated words as 2 words, and I've highlighted some examples on the statement included on the right. So here we have hyphenated words like in progress, equity driven. Those are 2 separate. Those would be 2 separate words. And so we count them as 2 words. But if you're using an automatic word count system, which a lot of people do, they type up their statement in Word will only count that as 1 word. There are some hyphenated words that we count as 1 word. And basically that's if we can see in a dictionary that there's an accepted spelling of a hyphenated word that is 1 word without a hyphen, we'll count it as 1 word. Like I said, this ends up tripping a lot of people up. So it can be really helpful to, in addition to using an automated word count, sometimes doing a hand count yourself to make sure that you're catching some of these things. Some other common ones that trip up an automated word count can be a backslash, as in and/or sometimes Word will count bullet points as words, which is something we do not count as words. So doing a hand count can help make sure that you're in the word limit. Some other strategies that you can use to kind of help with this process is similarly to your candidate filing it. If you can turn your statement in early, that gives us a chance to do a review and hopefully contact you if there are any issues. It's really helpful if even if you submit a hard copy to us in person at our office, if you can email us an electronic copy of your statement, that speeds that process along and helps us with our word count. You may also, especially if you're turning in your filing up against the deadline, you might try to aim for a slightly lower word count than 325 words. And finally, I just want you to think about what goes at the end of your statement. A lot of times statements, the last thing that's included is the candidate's website. And it may, for logistical reasons, make sense for that to go there. But again, if you're over the word count, that's going to be what the section that those final words are going to be the ones that get cut first if we need to trim you down to 325 words. So you might consider that as part of your strategy. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that one of the other things that folks like to include in their candidate statements are endorsements. So if you would like to include the names of any individuals or organizations who support you, you in your voters pamphlet statement, you're going to need to submit an endorsement form, this JCVPO2 form, for every single name that you include in your statement. The exception is if there's a public quote from like a newspaper, you can cite that quote instead without an endorsement form, but typically you need an endorsement form. And I just want to highlight on this slide that the form has two options, option 1 and option 2, that I'm going to get into a little bit more detail in a second. But just know that your endorser needs to fill out one or the other of these sections of the form. They should not fill out both sections of the form. They should just choose one option. All right, let's go to the next slide. So the differences between option 1 and option 2 on the endorsement form is that option 1 says that the use of the name, the person's name or the organization's name and information about them, somebody's title, somebody's, whether you spell the full name, whether you abbreviate the name, any sort of information about that is determined by the filer. That's you, the candidate. So this gives you the most freedom to use your endorser's name how you would like. What will happen is when we review your filings, we'll look through and see if there's a name listed in your statement. We will look through and see if you have an endorsement form to go with it. If you don't and don't turn in an endorsement form by the filing deadline, we'll remove the endorsement from your statement. If they do have an endorsement form for that person or that organization, then that's all we check for option 1 is whether that form is there. And it's up to you and the person or organization endorsing you to come to an agreement about how you talk about them in the voters pamphlet. The other option is option 2, and that is where information is determined by the endorser, so the person who's supporting you. And for that, similarly to option 1, we'll check and see if there's an endorsement form for that person or organization. And if we see that on the form they've selected option 2, the only information that we will print in the voters pamphlet is what is in the reproduction box that's included in option 2. So some things to look out for is if you want to include a quote, the full quote, and the person's name next to the quote, all needs to be in the reproduction box. If they write out the full name of their organization in the reproduction box, you have to include their full name in your voters pamphlet statement exactly as it appears in the box. Sometimes we're able to do a little bit of communicating if there's a typing error or something like that in your statement. But if there isn't an exact match between the two that we're able to resolve, we may not be able to use that endorsement. So this gives your supporter more control over how their name and information is used, and sometimes that makes them more comfortable in the process, but it can be a little bit more limiting to you, especially when you're running against some word count issues, if they've written something long in the reproduction box. And finally, I will just note that an issue that has come up with some of our endorsement forms, and this is true of your filing form as well, is that all signatures that are required should reflect people's kind of real wet signatures. We don't need the original form that they signed. You can make copies and submit those, and that's fine. And they can be submitted to us over email, but they do have to be a real signature. We don't take signatures from programs like DocuSign that are digital. And we also don't allow people to just type in cursive script into a box. So just kind of be aware of that as you're checking endorsement forms and as you're thinking about submitting your own forms. And that's where I will leave you with just some of those tips to be thinking about heading into voters pamphlet filing season in just a few short months. And I'll just add, Edward and myself are the two staff people in our office who work closely with candidates on voters pamphlet filings. So if you have any questions at all, please email or call our office and we'll be speaking to you directly. There's no question too technical or too small, and we certainly prefer to get those before the deadline as opposed to figuring out issues after you've submitted your filings. So I do hope you'll be in touch, and we'll have our contact info on a couple of slides. And with that, I will turn over to Edward to talk about results reporting.
Thank you, Kali. Hello, everyone. My name is Edward Gutierrez, and I'm the communications coordinator here at Multnomah County Elections. And I'm here to share with you a little bit about our reporting schedule, reporting formats, and additional information as well. So all of this is related to election night results. So we can get to the next slide. Thank you. So for the reporting schedule, on election night, Tuesday, November 5th, the first unofficial result is posted and goes live at 8 p.m. We will post preliminary round-by-round results for all City of Portland ranked choice voting contests to our website, Portland.Gov. The Elections Division will post the next update of round-by-round results by 6 p.m. on Thursday, November 7th, and will provide regular updates thereafter up until results are certified on December 2nd. As with other contests, unofficial RCV results will change as we process and add more ballots to the results. And last but not least, our election results schedule, which provides more information on the day and time of results updates, will be posted no later than 30 days before Election Day and can also be found on our website. So if you'd like to find additional information of when results will be posted, you can find that information on our website no later than 30 days before Election Day. Thank you very much. Reporting formats. So our goal is to present results for RCV contests in multiple formats so that voters have multiple opportunities to see and understand them for all the visual learners out there. Thus, we are preparing to present RCV contest results in 3 formats: a spreadsheet, a clickable bar chart, and a simplified table. So let me go back to the spreadsheet. The spreadsheet will show the full tabulation for each contest, and this will also serve as the official results reports. The clickable bar chart, that provides a visual of round-by-round results. And the simplified table provides visual of round-by-round results in an additional easy to digest format. And so All of our reporting formats have been developed drawing on best practices of other jurisdictions. Some of those jurisdictions are, for the example, City of San Francisco, New York City, Minneapolis, Arlington, Virginia, etc. And those jurisdictions have implemented ranked choice voting. Last on the top here, we understand RCV results will look different than the election results that voters are used to seeing. So in addition, for large elections such as the November general, we are required by statute to also share results with the Secretary of State, who has their own website where they post results, unofficial results. And on that website, results.oregonvotes.gov, you can see results for local contests and local results for state contests. So if you went to that page now, it is active. It is showing information regarding the May primary election. In November, obviously, that link will go live and it will have information regarding the November general. So that's another place you can find information. All posts to the SOS Secretary of State site display precinct level results for each contest. That's, another level of layer that a lot of folks that are interested in the breakdown of the election like to have that information at hand. So that's why a lot of people go to that website to find precinct level results. And the SOS election results website is not configured for RCV results. So it will likely only show first rank results for RCV contests. So that's similar to how Benton County, who has ranked choice voting, no, I'm sorry, Benton County does administer the election. I believe it's the city of Corvallis that has ranked choice voting. So that's an example of how they post results as well. First rank results. Last, results updates become less frequent as we move past election day. If there is a close contest, important results updates to consider tracking. November 6th, the day after election day. The day after election day, usually we'll get the most quantity of postmarked ballots by mail. The next update to consider, November 13th, the day after the postmarked ballot deadline. And last but not least, November 27th, 3 weeks after election day. This update will include challenge ballots that were cured and counted. Next slide. Additional information. All results will become final on certification day, Monday, December 2nd, 2024. In early fall of this year, Multnomah County Elections will be hosting additional information sessions. We plan to provide more detailed information on the results reports so that candidates, media, and voters are ready to understand and interact with them. And last but not least, event dates will be posted on our website, multnomahvotes.gov, at a later date. That's all the information. Thank you so much. Here's our contact information. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Edward. And now we have about 10 minutes to get to some of the questions that people have posed in Q&A. We have until 2:15, then we will promptly take a break then. But with that time now, I'm going to dive into some of the questions. And the first question is for you, James. How does the elections office determine which ballots are the ones above the winning threshold to be reallocated? So basically, which ballots are chosen for redistribution after reaching the threshold for election?
That's a great question. So I'm glad I get a chance to clarify here. So when a candidate goes over the threshold in multi-winner, like we talked about and saw in that example, let's say, for example, they needed 100 votes and they got 200 votes, just to kind of make the math easy. 100 votes will be reapportioned because they are 100 votes over the threshold that they needed to get elected. but it will actually be a portion of every vote from every ballot. So we don't choose, there'd be no way to equitably choose, a random number of ballots or whoever, voted last, there'd be no equitable way to do it. So we choose a portion of every vote. In this case, it would be half of the votes because it's half or what is required. Half of every vote will stay with that winning candidate. And the other half will look at the ballot, each ballot's next choice, and will reallocate that vote to those individuals. We have some math equations available to sort of do the tabulation on the back end. If you really want to dive into that, that's all available on our website. And there's a number of videos that can kind of help walk through that part of the process in a number of different ways so you can see it visually. But yeah, that's the simple answer to that question, is that everybody's ballot gets reallocated a portion of.
Thank you, James, for that. Next up, I've got a question for you, Tate. So Tate, our question is about the mayor's position here. So I'm going to rephrase it slightly to ask, Tate, can you explain how the mayor has a code of ethics and how elected officials in the city of Portland are held accountable both by the city at large and by the voting public?
Wow, that is a big question. That's a wonderful question. And I will say, I might not be the best person to answer it solely just because what I've heard from city attorneys and the city administrator, Mike Jordan, is generally the elected officials have the authorities and responsibilities that are outlined in the charter, and that is really what we can hold them accountable to. And just because we are in a democracy and you have the power of the vote, that is really how we hold them accountable. They need to try to be reelected. However, I will say that with all the best practices research that we've been doing and the recommendations that we are making to council, we are recommending things like a code of ethics and different elements like that for the council to follow. And I think through the onboarding process, we will be providing them with examples like that to really show them and encourage them to respect each other and work together. And also all the great work that the Government Transition Advisory Committee is doing and everything. We're really trying to outline how invested in this process the community is and outline what their expectations are of the elected officials. So I hope that starts to answer your questions, but I can take that back to my colleagues as well.
Thank you for that, Tate. Not to put you on the spot too much, but the next question is also for you, so don't go anywhere. This one is, will council members have an office in their district?
Mm-hmm. And if you've been keeping up with the overall city conversation on this, there is an interest in councilors having in-district offices because part of their role is really connecting with community and being out in the community more. And that's something that my colleagues at the Division of Asset Management have looked into extensively. And what they found and ultimately recommended to our elected officials is that it would be very costly to have in-district offices, but also they weren't really completely clear on the program of those offices and really think there should be more community engagement on what is desired in those district offices, so we could really do a better job of establishing those. And so our current city council has recommended that this be a decision that is made by the newly elected officials and involve kind of more of an engagement process that is overseen by them. So in short, council chambers is currently under renovation. Later this summer, the downtown city council offices will undergo a renovation, but that's all we'll have starting.
All right, welcome back everyone after that short break. I'm gonna get right back into things and pass things over to Louise Hanson, who is the elections officer with Portland City Elections. So Louise, have at it.
Thanks so much, Leah. And welcome back to our second part of this training. This is the beginning of the section of our training on campaign finance regulations. So I will be the first in a series of 3 speakers covering different regulations for campaign finance. I'll be covering the regulations set out in the city charter, which started out as an initiative petition and was adopted by Portland voters in 2018. Please note that there's going to be a lot of content in this section, but the content can also be found in our campaign finance manual. So please don't worry if you don't catch it all now, and we're always just a phone call or email away as well. And with that, let's start with an important reminder. So campaign finance in Oregon exists in a world of different and overlapping regulations, including regulations enforced by the state, the city elections office, that's us, and the city's small donor elections program. Please be mindful that just because you may be complying with one set of regulations, that does not guarantee that you will be in compliance under all the sets of regulations. So just be sure you're paying attention. Now, before we dig into the heavier content, I also want to make sure that you know what campaign finance resources exist when it comes to the regulations under the city charter. So first of all, next slide, there is the city charter itself. The campaign finance regulations can be found in Article 3, which is available online. And by the way, the website links are noted at the top in blue on these slides for you. So in addition to the city charter, we also have the city code. And in chapter 210 is where you'll find the campaign finance regulations in the code. For the time being, the language in the code is nearly identical to that of the charter, specifically for the campaign finance parts. Additionally, next slide, the auditor's office, our office, has adopted administrative rules providing additional guidance and clarity on the city charter's campaign finance regulations. These are also available online. Next, we have our city elections website, and this is where you can find this webpage, which is devoted specifically to the charter's campaign finance regulations. So you can find links to our rules and regulations, the FAQs or frequently asked questions, and how past campaign finance investigations have turned out. Lastly, our office has put together a campaign finance guide with more information. We just released an update this month. You can use this QR code to download the manual, or it's also on our campaign finance webpage, or also on the Run for City office webpage. Again, everything I will cover today is also included in the guide, and we've included a link in the chat as well if you don't want to use the QR code to download the guide. So next, we're going to be jumping into the city charter's contribution limits. So what are contributions? Contributions mainly fall into 2 categories: cash contributions and in-kind contributions. So cash contributions include cash, checks, or any legal instrument redeemable as currency, and it can be transmitted physically or by electronic means. Whereas in-kind contributions are contributions other than money. So that's going to be goods or services that have a monetary value. And that monetary value is going to be whatever the fair market value is that a consumer would expect to pay for that good or service. So generally, contributions can take the form of payments, loans, gifts, forgiveness of debt, certain services, supplies, equipment, or other things of value. Specifically under the city charter's regulations, the following things are not considered contributions: rooms, phones, or internet access for use by a candidate committee either for free or at a reduced cost. And also the funds distributed by the small donor elections program as matching funds, those don't count either. I do want to highlight here that when it comes to contributions, and especially in-kind contributions, These can be defined differently under state law, the city charter's definitions, and also the small donor elections program. So 2 important resources I want to highlight are the Auditor's Office Administrative Rule 13 Appendix B, which includes a definition for contribution that applies to the city charter regulations. And for those of you that are participating in the small donor elections, please be sure to review their definition and their administrative rules as well. So the contribution limits under city charter are framed from the perspective of who can give contributions to candidates or their candidate committees and how much. So candidates may accept contributions from individuals, political committees, small donor committees themselves, and if they're a participant of the small donor elections program, possibly others. Under the city charter regulations, an individual may contribute up to the value of $579 to a candidate or candidate committee. For political committees, the limit is also a value of $579. For small donor committees, there's no limit on how much they can contribute. Small donor committees are defined differently here than the small donor organizations under the small donor elections program. Here, this committee is a political committee that has only ever accepted contributions from individuals and no more than $100 from each individual during the calendar year. When it comes to giving money or a loan to your own candidate committee, there's no limit on how much you can self-fund. Also, you should be aware that if you are a participant under the small donor elections program, the city charter allows you to additionally accept any contributions that that program allows. However, if you should exit that program for any reason, you would once again be subject to the limits included on this slide. The charter contribution limits are per candidate or candidate committee. So I just want to highlight for you that donors can donate to more than one candidate. So for example, if you had Motivated Molly, who's an individual, and they wanted to donate up to $579 to candidate A, they could still donate up to $579 to candidate B at the same time. So how do we calculate whether the charter contribution limit has been reached? We're looking at how much total has been given during a particular window of time that we call the election cycle. For the November general election, the election cycle for all city candidates runs from November 9, 2022 through November 5th, 2024. So now let's talk for a minute about liability and enforcement. So let's say you have an individual donor that contributed $300 to one of your campaign events last month and another $300 at your campaign event today, for a total of $600 in this election cycle, even though the contribution limit for individuals under city charter is $579. If you were to return or refund that $21 overage within 7 calendar days, the city elections office, which is us, will not count that excess $21 towards the contribution limit. However, if you do not return the $21 overage within 7 calendar days, then our office may end up finding you liable for receiving more than you should receive, and also your donor liable for giving more than they are allowed to give. So as a best practice tip, consider listing the city contribution limits on your materials for your donors. And also remember that the city elections office and small donor elections enforce their regulations separately. So keep in mind that in some circumstances, it may be possible to violate one or the other or both sets of regulations. So make sure you pay attention. When it comes to reporting campaign finance activity, candidates will need to use the state's ORSTAR system, which the state will talk to you more about in a little bit. The city elections office does not require candidates or political committees to report their contributions or expenditures directly to the city, unless our office requests it as part of an investigation. However, small donor elections may require candidates to report their contribution and expenditure activity directly to the program, whether or not you are a participant in that program. So you can contact the Small Donor Elections for more information. So next, let's talk about briefly the city charter's expenditure limits. As in, we don't have any. The city elections office does not enforce the type or amount of spending by candidates or their committees. However, the Small Donor Elections Program may have their own limits on the type of expenditure or amount of money spent by candidates. So participants of that program will need to check with the program. Now, let's talk next about communication disclosures. So first of all, what are disclosures? A disclosure is the information included in political communication that tells you more about who funded that communication. So for the disclosures required under city charter, the information included must be prominently displayed and easily comprehensible to a person with average reading, vision, and hearing faculties. So who is required to include disclosures and for what type of communications? The disclosure requirements under city charter apply to all candidates, including participants of the Small Donor Elections Program. They also apply to political committees, independent spenders, individuals, and other entities. Disclosures are required on communications to voters supporting or opposing one or more candidates for election to city office. If the communication costs $250 or more to create, and if the communication is not otherwise excluded from the disclosure requirement by city charter, code, or the administrative rules. So let's take a look at those communications that are excluded from this requirement and don't require city disclosures. Disclosures are not required by the city on communications that cost less than $250 to create. Now, keep in mind here that the word create is defined broadly to include things like designing, hosting, or distributing. Disclosures are also not required on small items worn or carried by individuals. Maybe you can think of a few examples. Could be something like a button, a t-shirt, a pen, things of this nature. Disclosures are also not required on bumper stickers, signs smaller than 6 square feet, like a lawn sign, 500 or less substantially similar pieces of literature that are distributed within any 10-day period, and government documents that candidates must fill out, or a personalized communication from an unpaid volunteer that was prepared without the use of a template. So for the remaining communications that do require disclosures, the disclosures must be prominently displayed. And what that means will depend on the type of communication that you have. So for printed materials, websites, and billboards, it means having font that's in a contrasting color. For printed materials and websites, this also requires that the size of disclosure text be the same size or bigger than the majority of text in the communication. And the size of the disclosures on billboards must be at least 10% of the sign height. Next, for videos, the disclosure must be displayed on the screen for at least 4 seconds, and closed captioning does not count. And for audio, the disclosure must be spoken or played no faster than 5 words per second. Specifically for digital communications, where the platform limits you to 1,000 characters or less, or where including all the required disclosure information would take up 40% or more of your message space, you can choose to include your disclosure information by still listing who paid to provide or present the communication, but then you can include a link to an active website that has the rest of the full disclosure information included there. For disclosure information included on a linked website, the information still must be timely, which means that it must be current to within 5 business days of the initial transmission of the communication. And keep in mind that whenever an update to the disclosure information is required on a website, you must make a copy of the old disclosure information and keep it for at least 1 year following the end of the election cycle. For the disclosure information to be timely on other electronic communications like emails and audio or video communications, the information must be current to within 5 business days of transmission. For printed material, the information must be current to within 10 business days of printing. So far we've covered that all candidates running for city office may be required to include disclosures on their political communications. Which communications do or don't require disclosures, the requirements to prominently display disclosures, and what it means to have a timely disclosure. So now let's talk about what information gets included in the disclosures. So depending on the circumstances, some or all of the following information may need to be included. Who paid to provide or present the communication that cost at least $250 to create? Who the top contributors are, the type of business industry for the top contributors, and the top 3 funders for top contributors. So first, including who paid to provide or present a communication. This means listing the names of all political committees, individuals, and or other entities that contributed toward the $250 or more value of the communication. So here's some examples. You could see on an advertisement that it states paid for by friends of candidate A, or it might say paid for by Portlanders for a happy Portland. Next, you will need to figure out if you have top contributors, which we also call dominant contributors, that will need to be listed. How many of you know what a dominant contributor is? If you do, you're in great shape, and if you don't worry because we're about to review that. So a dominant contributor is a top contributor that has contributed over the value of $1,158, which could be through cash or in-kind contributions, to those that are listed as paying to provide or present the communication. The 1,158 contribution value is the total amount contributed over the election cycle. If you have a contributor that has contributed less than this amount, you don't need to list them. Because of the contribution limits, the most likely scenario in which candidates may have top contributors to disclose would be if they are a participant of the Small Donor Elections Program and they have received a loan or in-kind contribution that's valued over $1,158. So next, after you have included who paid to provide or present the communication, you need to look at whether you have top contributors to disclose. If you do have top contributors to disclose, you will need to list the top 5. If you only have 3 that contributed over the value of 1,158, then you only need to list those 3. If you have 7 that have contributed over that amount, you only need to list the top 5. You'll determine which ones are the top 5 by listing the contributors that have contributed from most to least. And if there's a tie, like let's say 2 contributors donated $1,200, then you would list whichever one contributed the $1,200 most recently. For each top contributor that you list, you will also need to include the name of the industry from which the top contributor has made the majority of their income over the last 5 years. So you will find this name by looking for an industry name associated with a 6-digit code off the NAICS website. Be sure to list the name of the industry and not the number. So for example, here you would want to list soybean farming and not the number 11110. Now, next slide. When one of the top contributors listed happens to also be a nonprofit or a political committee, but not a small donor committee, the top 3 funders for that contributor will also need to be listed. So let's take a look at a full disclosure sample ad. on the next slide. There we go. Okay, so here we have an example ad by a political committee that was working with fictitious candidate Rose Moore to create this advertisement. Next slide. So in this ad, Bridges Over Adversity is the political committee that spent at least $250 to create this advertisement. So the advertisement states, paid for by Bridges Over Adversity. The top 5 contributors to Bridges Over Adversity are Business Interest Collective, LLC, Neighborly Neighbors Nonprofit, Razzle Dazzle, LLC, Dreamy Designs, and Joe Quimby. For each top contributor, we also see the industry name associated with a 6-digit NCAIS code. So we see that Business Interest Collective LLC is a business association. Neighborly Neighbors Nonprofit is an other social advocacy organization. Razzle Dazzle LLC is a law office. Dreamy Designs is a graphic design firm. And Joe Quimby is just an individual. So there's no industry code to list for them. So that's why there's just a blank blue box. Lastly, because Neighborly Neighbors is a nonprofit, its top 3 funders must also be listed. And those include here, Lucky Ducky Spas, Cat's Pajama Hotel, and Jill Anderson, who is another individual. So lastly, let's quickly discuss multi-campaign coordination, or what is sometimes referred to by some as slates. So first of all, remember the following. Candidates must file for office as individuals. So you cannot file for office together as a group or as a slate. Each candidate committee is specific to only one candidate. You cannot form a candidate committee for more than one candidate. Each candidate is also responsible for tracking their own contributions and expenditures. So with that in mind, here are some considerations if a candidate is considering coordinating with another candidate. As a best practice, consider requesting that contributions be designated for each candidate and avoid pooling contributions to split among candidates later. So, for example, instead of having a donor contribute $500 at a combined activity coordinated between 2 candidates and having the candidates split the $500 later, request that the donor contribute $250 to candidate A and $250 separately to candidate B. As another best practice, consider having each candidate pay for their expenses separately and avoid pooling expenses for the candidates to split later. Keep in mind here that spending by one candidate may count as an in-kind contribution to another candidate. So consider requesting separate billing and invoices. So for example, instead of one candidate paying a vendor and the other candidate reimbursing that candidate, consider requesting that the vendor charge the candidate separately with separate invoices. Lastly, when it comes to including disclosures on political advertisements paid for by multiple candidates, full disclosure information needs to be included for each candidate. So for example, if each candidate had 5 top contributors to disclose, then each candidate needs to list all 5. It's not the case that the top contributors would be combined between the candidates so that only 5 top contributors total would be listed on the advertisement. Instead, you should be seeing 10, 5 for each. So that's it for the city's campaign finance review. I hope this information has been helpful. If you ever have any questions, please feel free to give us a call or shoot us an email. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Louise. And now I'm going to hand it over to Daniel Luco, the Office of Small Donor Elections, Deputy Director there. Daniel, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate having a chance to come and present. My name is Daniel with Small Donor Elections, and we are the Small Donor Matching Program for the City of Portland. So next slide, please. Perfect. And then actually you can go one more over. Okay. So what is the Small Donor Elections Program? We are a program that provides a 9-to-1 match on the first $20 from each Portlander to candidates who are running for city office, mayor, auditor, and city council, and who opt into the program. It is an optional program, so candidates have to opt in. The program is designed to enable candidates to raise enough money to win elected office on the power of small contributions and matching funds alone. And so the match works, again, it's 9-to-1 on $20. So essentially what that will mean is if the donation's below 20 bucks, the city will add a 0 onto it. So if you have a Portland donor who gives you $5 because in your campaign for election, we will provide 45 in matching funds, and then you walk away with $50 between the matching funds and what the donor originally provided to you. Or if they give you $20, then we will give you $180 in matching funds, and then you walk away with $200. The most candidate can receive generally from an individual is $350. And so if a donor gives you the full $350 that they're allowed to give you, then we match the first $20 of that. So the $350 plus the $180 becomes $530. And aside from some exceptions we'll talk about later, that's generally the most you can walk away with for most individuals who live in the city of Portland. Next slide. Okay. So this is your basic overall step-by-step guide to participating in our program. Step 1 is you start complying with our small donor election rules. Again, we are an optional program, so we do have our own rule set in place. And those rules have been in effect since December 23rd, 2022, and will remain in effect until November 5th of this year. That means if you're looking at running in the program now, you would have had to accept donations and spent money in compliance with the program rules since December 23rd, 2022. So if you're looking at running for office and you already have a bank account set up because you've run for another office before, definitely connect with us because there are steps you have to take to make sure that your bank account is in compliance. Step 2 is you file the notice of intent and take the mandatory training. The notice of intent is just a sign-up paperwork. That's all it is. And you can visit our website, which is Portland.Gov/small-donor-elections. And there's a box called, I think, Program Forms and Documents. And you can access the notice of intent there. But you send the notice of intent to sign up with the program. And then you also take a mandatory training. Every candidate is required to take the training. And if they bring a treasurer on board, then the treasurer has to have already been trained too. So if you want to ask a volunteer or a friend to be your treasurer, that's totally fine. We just have to make sure that they get trained. Or if you hire someone who's already been trained before, then they do not have to get trained again. But anyway, step 2 is filing notice of intent and taking the mandatory training, which candidates have already started doing since July 1st of last year. And they can file their notice of intent up until August 20th, but they have to take the mandatory training by August 1st. The other thing to let you know about the mandatory training is that we do them privately, and we try to do them one-on-one, although of course you're welcome to invite someone to join. But we do it privately so that you have a chance to have candid conversations with us about where you are in your campaign and what your needs are. Step 3 is you start raising those matchable donations, and which I'll talk about what that means in a second. And then you start reporting all those donations and your expenditures to our program. So to be clear, you're reporting both to the state through their OrStar portal and also to our program. And then step 4 is you apply for certification and you start receiving the matching funds. We don't give out matching funds to everyone. We only give it out to candidates who have proven community support. And the way you prove you have community support is by raising money from a certain number of donors who live in the city of Portland. So if you're running for city council, you have to get 250 unique Portland donors to give you money in order to qualify for matching funds. If you're running for mayor, you have to get to 750 donors to qualify for matching funds from our program. And then you have until August 27th to meet that initial threshold. After the election's done, you must return any unspent matching funds to us because they do belong to the taxpayer. Next slide. These are the core rules of the program. And what I'll also say is like, it's a lot to follow. So always feel free to email and contact or call us if you'd like to set up a training, or if you just have general questions, we're happy to answer those for you. Most of the time when candidates run for office, they need startup funds, and that's where seed money comes in. And seed money just helps get your campaign up and off the ground. With seed money, you can raise up to $500 per donor, and for a total of $5,000. So if 10 donors give you $500 each, you've reached the $5,000 threshold. You can't raise any more of these type of donations. But you can raise seed donations from almost any entity that's allowed to give under federal and state law. So it could be you giving the seed donations from your personal funds, friends, family who live across the country, as well as nonprofits, Canada PACs, labor unions, etc. They're all allowed to give you up to $500, but again, once you reach $5,000, you have to stop. And you can raise most candidates choose to raise those funds at the very beginning because again, the purpose is to allow you to get your campaign off the ground, and so you can do things like build your website or hire a staff member. But you can technically raise these kind of donations up until when you apply for certification, i.e. when you've reached that threshold of $250 or $750 and you apply to us. Almost all the donations you receive are going to be from individuals because that's who the program is designed to incentivize, is everyday people especially who live in the city, giving small donations. So individuals are allowed to give you up to $350. And that's per individual. So, two partners who are married, each can give you $350. The exception, though, is that if they gave you seed funds, they can also turn around and give you a regular donation of $350. So, for instance, if you had a friend who lived in the city of Portland or even lived outside of the city, and they gave you a $500 seed donation, they are also allowed to turn around and give you a $350 regular donation. So if you have particularly passionate supporters who are individuals and qualify, or are small donor organizations, which I'll talk about in a second, you can ask those people for both a seed donation and a regular donation. That's a very important point. Entities, and by entities I mean organizations, anyone that's not a human being, entities are not allowed to give you money directly to your campaign unless it's in two circumstances. Number one is that they're seed donations, which we just talked about. And the second is if they are a small donor organization. A small donor organization can give you $350 directly, just as an individual can. A small donor organization is any group where at least 90% of the funds they've raised come from individuals giving $250 and less. So the example I like to use is if a bunch of neighbors get together and they create an organization to advocate for planting more trees, and everyone throws in $250, that's a small donor organization. A number of grassroots groups and some labor unions count as SDOs. And the reason we have that is because that's democracy in action. That's everyday people pulling their small donations to have impact. And that's why we have a special category for these organizations. You can also take a loan of up to $5,000 at any point, as long as you pay it back by the election day with your campaign funds. So a lot of candidates will loan themselves $5,000 and also raise $5,000 in seed funds, so they have enough money in their bank account to start off hitting the ground running. Volunteer time is unlimited, so people could volunteer a professional service to you. Or they can certainly volunteer in the way we usually think of volunteers, as in like knocking doors making, I think helping around the office, and filmmaking. In-kind donations have a number of rules around them because we want to make sure that community organizations and individuals can participate in your campaign, but also we do want to make sure that the focus is still on raising, small donations from everyday people. So in-kind donations are allowed. And by in-kind donations, I mean if they give you a good or service. So a direct donation is if I gave you $350 to buy a printer for your campaign office. That's a direct donation. I gave you the cash and then you're buying the printer. The in-kind donation is if I just gave you the printer itself. Individuals can give you up to $350 in in-kind donations, and they can do that for a service or an item. Organizations can give you up to $10,000 per organization. And there's no overall limit to how much you take, as long as each group is limited to $10,000 or less. Organizations can give you up to $10,000, but there are rules around it. Generally they have to be directly provided, which means it's an item that they already own or control. Like for instance, if they wanted to give you office space for your campaign, it has to be a room in their building that they already use for their own purposes. That's an example I like to use when thinking about directly provided. But there is an exception for language inclusivity. Organizations can definitely hire individuals to translate your website into another language or bring an ASL interpreter to your event, as an example. Also, what they give you depends on what kind of organization it is. So a small donor organization, which we already talked about, 90% of donors giving $250 or less, they can give you a wide variety of in-kind donations. A non-small donor organization, which are most big nonprofits, they can give you up to $10,000 as well, but it must be for a democracy building activity, which is essentially someone that's a donation designed to bring more people into our democracy too. And we have those rules spelled out in our law. In-kind donations are complicated, and we do want to help provide guidance. So we're happy to discuss those further and walk through examples in a training we provide to you, or if you want to reach out to us with direct questions. Next slide. This is a very critical slide to show you. So individuals can definitely give you donations in credit card, check, cash, money order. Those are all fine. And if they qualify, we'll even match those donations. But cash and money order donations are how fraud typically slips into these kind of programs. So we need a little bit more oversight on those kind of donations. So if someone gives you cash or money order, again, you can keep the donation and we'll even match it if it qualifies. But the donor must fill out what's called a donor attestation document. And a template of this is on our website, Portland.Gov/small donor elections, which you're welcome to use. But in that case, if someone gives you cash or money order, the donor fills out the top part, the donor signs and dates it, and whoever collected the donation physically fills out the bottom part. So just know that you can take cash and money order donations, but there is a process around those too. Next slide. We do have campaign spending restrictions. We are giving you matching funds to enable you to be able to run for office and get your message out to voters and participate in our electoral system, but we're not giving you matching funds to enrich yourself. So there are some rules about what you can do and what you cannot do with the matching funds. For instance, you cannot, pay a family member with your matching funds, and you cannot use the matching funds to travel outside of for out-of-state travel, except you are allowed to go to Clark and Skamania counties. So like anything else, you have questions about what you can and cannot spend money on, feel free to ask us. We're happy to walk you through it. Next question, or next slide. Okay, so step 2, you file that notice of intent, which you have until August 20th, and you take the mandatory training, which you have until August 1st to do that. We definitely recommend taking it sooner rather than later. And we're happy to make sure that the content of the conversation keeps stays between us. We know that, you know, sometimes there are politically sensitive questions that you're working through. And you can call or email us to set up a question, or sorry, to set up a training. Our contact information is on the website, Portland.Gov/small donor elections. And then, so both of those steps must be completed before you start raising the matchable donations, which are the donations that you need in order to qualify for matching funds and the donations that we match. So, you know, it's a smart idea to file the notice of intent and take the mandatory training sooner because it gives you more time to raise those critical donations. Next slide. So then you start raising those matchable donations. And as we said before, if you are running for mayor, you must have 750 unique qualifying individuals give you money in order to qualify for public matching funds for mayor. And if you're running for council or auditor, you need 250. But they do not have to live in your district. They can live from anywhere in the city proper. They do have to be from an adult who does reside in the city of Portland, though. And then when you file that notice of intent, we give you access to a website called openelectionsportland.org. And that's how you report the donations and expenses to the program. Again, it's separate from how you report to the state through Orstar, but it is on the same timeline. So it's once every 30 days, and then closer to the election, it's once every 7 days. Next slide. So when you report those donations, that is, you know, a password protected side of the website, and only you, your treasurer, and us can see those. But there is a public side to the website too, and that is also openelectionsportland.org, and that just shows the metadata. So that just shows where candidates are raising their money from, you know, where the donations are coming from, whether they are inside Portland, outside Oregon, what percentage of the donations from individuals, organizations, in you know, in large donations versus small donations. All the information is available to the public, and you can go right now to openelectionsportland.org, and you can see the website is live and is continually updated. So next slide. So once you get to the threshold, whether it's 250 donors for city council auditor or 750 for mayor, you can apply for certification, which is when we start giving you your matching funds. But we do recommend going over the threshold before applying. You know, just like collecting signatures, you want to make sure there's a cushion and there's enough there that if some don't count, you're still in a comfortable territory to get certified. You're only allowed to apply for certification twice, but you can ask for an assessment as many times as you want prior to applying. So an assessment means, let's say if you get to 225 donors and you want to see how many qualify, you can email us and ask us for that, and then we'll do a count for you and say, of the 225 donors you've collected, 215 would count towards certification. So that way you know exactly where you are, you know, as you get closer to that critical step. We provide the matching funds in direct deposits every month, and then you know, every 2 weeks once we get closer to election. So there's no check in the mail. It's a direct deposit into your bank account. It's faster and more transparent for everyone. You know, the city council is the one who provides us with the funds, which then we can distribute out to candidates. So the city council is the one who makes the decisions about whether or not our program is fully funded. The city council is currently in discussions about what the budget's going to look like for the next budget cycle. And I don't believe that they've had that final vote yet. So there is still a possibility that those numbers can change. If the program is fully funded, we can give out matching funds to you, but there's a limit to how much we can give out to candidates. So if a candidate's running for city council, we can give the candidate as much as $300,000. If the candidate is running for auditor, we can give you as much as 100,000. And the candidate is running for mayor, we can give you as much as 750,000. But that is only if the program is fully funded. It's very possible that the program might be underfunded, and in that case, we have to keep solvent. So our oversight commission voted in January to reduce the total amount we can give out to candidates in order to make sure that everyone who gets certified does get matching funds. So right now, the match caps are, this is $120,000 if you are running for city council, 40,000 if you're running for auditor, $100,000 if you're running for mayor. That's the most that we can provide you in matching funds. Again, you're certainly allowed to raise as much as you want from individuals and qualifying organizations, as long as each one respects their contribution limit. Hopefully, if we do get fully funded, we can raise those match caps up again. But I think it's smart to go in, with the understanding that we have this reduced match cap situation. And just real quickly to explain, we give those matching funds out in tiers if you're running for city council. So if you run for city council and you get to 250 donors who qualify, we'll give you up to $40,000 in matching funds. And then once you get to 750 donors, we can give you a second up to $40,000 for a total of $80,000. And then if you get to 1,250 donors, we can give you a third up to $40,000 for a total of $120,000. So that works, that's a tiered system, but that only applies to city council races. Next slide. Okay. Once the election's done, you have to return the unused public funds to us. You actually have 45 days to pay your outstanding expenses and then return those funds to us. And we calculate it proportionally. So, if we provided you 80% of the funds, of 80% of the total amount you've raised for your campaign, then you have to return 80% of your remaining funds back to us. Most campaigns spend down all the money they have going into an election, but if you have a couple $1,000s left over in your bank account, again, part of that does belong to the taxpayer, so we do take that back. Next slide. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. We're happy to answer questions, and we're happy to set up that training with you where we go into much greater depth. You can also go on our website at Portland.Gov/small-donor-elections, and we have a copy of the training we provide there, along with a list of all the candidates who filed or who sent us their notice of intent, and a list of all the candidates who achieved certification status. All the forms are on there as well as frequently asked questions and our contact information. So please do not hesitate to contact us if you have questions about the program or if you're interested in joining it. And I think that's the end of my presentation.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Sure.
And now I'm going to pass it over to our final presenter for today. We have Dominic Lopez joining us, who is a technical trainer at the Oregon Secretary of State's Election Division. Dominic, thank you for being here. I'll hand it off to you.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Leah. Let me know if I'm not coming through clearly or something like that. But hey, again, I'm Dominic. I use he and him pronouns, and I'm a technical trainer with the state. I've been with the SOS for about 3 years, but before that, my primary background for about a decade was in campaigns and advocacy. And so, when I put together trainings like this and take opportunities to present to the community, I'm always kind of coming at it from that perspective. In fact, sort of my first interaction with the state elections division was being an observer in the basement as they were scrutineering the signatures in a petition that I had helped submit. And so, when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm always really trying to make sure that the resources that we're providing make sense and are as accessible as possible to folks, because, frankly, I know that for a lot of you, you don't think about this every day of the week, right? This is a once in a couple of years or even once in a lifetime kind of moment. And so there's a lot of rules to follow, and I want to make sure that you all have the resources you need. I think just to be clear, the way I've configured this section here is that I am going to be pretty broad. This isn't advice, or this is not, it is advice, it's not really instructions. I'm going to give you resources that you can chew on and places that you can get more detailed questions answered, but I want to make sure that you have a sense of what your obligations ultimately are going to be, so you can look into them into more detail. And then the other thing I want to flag is I am not going to be talking about the campaign finance reform package that passed earlier this year. There's a lot of juicy nuggets in there, but our office is still in the beginning stages of working that through and seeing what implementation is going to look like. Since there's not really anything that's being implemented for this election cycle, I'm going to steer real clear of that, even if you ask a question. But yeah, let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. So state level campaign finance, this is effectively the enforcement of ORS Chapter 260. This applies to candidates broadly, and that includes candidates for local office, like those running in the city of Portland. The requirements are wholly separate from those at the municipal level. So, of course, folks have been talking about the small donor election fund in the city. This is sort of the as has been stated, these stand on their own, and successfully meeting the requirements of one does not necessarily mean you've met the requirements of another, even if they might look similar or even the same at first glance. I'm going to try to point out where those differences may exist, but it's just good to keep that in mind. Rather than reading ORS Chapter 260, I strongly recommend that your place of reference is the Oregon Campaign Finance Manual. That is adopted into rule, which is effectively, it makes it the rules that you follow, both the thing that you can read for information and also the place that we look to make sure we're making correct enforcement decisions. And I'll point out where to find that in a later slide here. But ultimately, Oregon campaign finance law can be thought of as a combination of prohibitions and requirements. Prohibitions on things like personal use, prohibitions on things like contributions in a false name, exerting undue influence, and then of course reporting requirements, which I'll talk about more in a second here. But I think one thing I want to flag up front is that this may be your very first step. So we've talked a lot about filing deadlines for things like office and for the voters pamphlet. The filing for campaign finance, whether it's making a committee and beginning to file individual transactions, is triggered when you start running for office and ultimately when you start spending and receiving money in your campaign. It's not uncommon that candidates will find that they need to begin reporting to state campaign finance authorities through Orastar a year or more in advance of the actual election. And so if you've already started doing this, that's great. If you're thinking to yourself, okay, maybe that obligation applies to me, this is the right place to be starting. Next slide. So Orastar, love it or hate it, we love it. It is the state's campaign finance and filing reporting system. It's the central system for all of our state level filings, and it does have publicly accessible data back to 2006. If you're not familiar with Orastar, I'm not going to really get into the weeds here, kind of like I said, but give it a Google, poke around in there, and you can get a really good sense of what I mean when I say things like creating a committee or filing individual transactions. Look up a candidate you are familiar with by name, and you'll find a lot of information in there. It'll give you a sense of sort of what it means and what it looks like to participate in state campaign finance. If you are filing and not just observing as a member of the public, you do need to make an account. And I will emphasize this because the folks on our campaign finance team asked me to emphasize it. You only need one account per campaign. A lot of folks, if they run again, or if they're a treasurer on multiple campaigns, feel like they need to make separate accounts. But as you can see in that screenshot there, there's one account that is managing multiple committees. One's Dominic for Dogcatcher and one's Friends of Testy McTesterson, my loyal testing friend when I do all of these screenshots. And you can have 2, 3, 12 committees attached to a single account. Please don't make additional accounts. Yeah, next slide, please. So what do you have to file and what do you have to report? So this is that second half, not the prohibitions, but the reporting requirements. The first things first is if you're running for office and you meet certain requirements, which I'll get to at the bottom of this slide, you need to maintain what's known as a candidate committee. In common language, most people call these PACs, political action committees. State law sort of breaks them down into different categories. But since we're talking about folks running for the city of Portland, we'll be referring to them as a candidate committee. The candidate committee is sort of a financial entity that's specific to a single candidate. It's the place where you would go put information about the money that has been given to the committee and the money that has been spent out of the committee. So like you saw on the previous slide, an example of that would be Dominic running for the fictional office of dog catcher. And that committee, by the fact that it's been filed in Orastar, is now publicly viewable, right? A member of the community who's interested, even an opponent, could pull that information up in Orastar and see what's been publicly disclosed there. This can be the source of media intrigue. This can be the source of just neighbors trying to get a sense of what's going on, but ultimately it is about transparency. The committee needs to maintain a lot of information, primarily things like residence address, things like contact information. If there are other people involved in the campaign, like a treasurer, for example, their information needs to be available on the committee as well. And it's important that that is all kept up to date. So if there's a change to the committee's structure, there's often a requirement that that gets updated within Orastar rather quickly. Besides the committee itself, you'll also need to report contributions and expenditures, again, depending, I'll get to that bit here. So, a simple example of this is if you go to Costco and spend $93 on office supplies, that's a cash expenditure. I went to Costco, I spent $93, and you would say for office supplies or something to that effect. Even if you spend your own money, that is still reportable. If you went to Costco and spent $93 of your own money for your own campaign, you'd still have to report that as an in-kind donation, an in-kind contribution to your campaign, right? Because that was money that was spent for the purpose of you running for office. If you've been involved in politics in Oregon before, you're probably familiar with what comes next when it comes to contributions. If somebody gives a donation to your campaign, you'll need their name, you'll need their address, and you'll need, somewhat infamously, their occupation and employer. That is all required by state law. And if you have questions about what exactly that means, you're welcome to ask us and we'll help you give some clarification to make sure that you're getting the right information every time. One mistake I see a lot of new campaigns make when collecting donations is if they're not familiar with that or they don't use a service that automatically accepts or requires it, they'll end up with a lot of contributions where they do not have that required information, and that can result in penalties. And so it's really important to be thinking about that in advance. Another requirement are political communications disclosures. We call these just the paid for buys, right? This is, I think, similar to what's been talked about previously, but again, broadly speaking, state campaign finance law is not the same as county or city laws that may apply. And so satisfying one may not satisfy the other. Broadly speaking, candidates can expect to say, Dominic for dog catcher, PAC ID 21866 on the bottom of their campaign flyers and other sort of media distributions. The requirements, our requirements can vary depending on the type of committee, but that is sort of the simplest gist of it. And then the last thing on this page that I want to make sure that I cover is sort of what your requirements may be depending on the size of the campaign that you are involved in. So Oregon state law has some provisions for smaller campaigns to reduce the burden of reporting. I will say up top, a lot of folks will say, oh, well, I just want to report everything because I want to be as transparent as possible. And I think that is a super noble way of thinking about it. It also opens you up to making a mistake. And even if you decide to report, even though you don't have to, you may end up facing penalties for those mistakes that you wouldn't have otherwise been facing. And so it's really helpful to smartly use these exemptions when possible to limit your reporting burden, make your life a little bit easier, and close the door on mistakes that you wouldn't have had to have made in the first place. So as you can see, there's sort of three tiers. The lowest possible tier is $750 or less. If your campaign doesn't expect to spend or receive $750 throughout a year, that's a calendar year in our case, then you may be completely exempt from having to file a committee. You'll still need to keep your books and you'll still need to keep track of information because ultimately, if you do go past that $750 threshold, you'll have to start reporting, and it would be really hard if you hadn't kept your books separately. The next level is $3,500 or less. If your committee is above $750 but below $3,500 in or out, and again, in a year, calendar year, you have to file a committee, Dominic for dog catcher, something, something, something in Orastar. You can also file what's known as a certificate of limited contributions and expenditures, which means you don't have to tell us every time you go to Costco. You still have to keep your receipts because if you go past $3,500, you'll need to tell us that you went to Costco. But in the meantime, it can reduce your reporting burdens. And I will cheat on what I said earlier, that $3,500 amount next year in 2025 is changing. I don't know if that has, run into folks, circles, but it's still $3,500 for this calendar year in this election cycle. And then, of course, finally, if you don't qualify for either of those, the 750 or the 3,500, then you just have sort of the normal obligations, which are to report those contributions and expenditures, to maintain a committee accurately, and to do so within the time limits that are placed upon it by state law. Next slide, please. So the first resource I want to point you towards is our main landing page. It's Portland.Gov/transparency. And this is sort of our campaign finance home base, good for the public and also for candidates running for office. Next slide. This is what it looks like, or at least this is what it looked like when I took the screenshot a few months ago. I'm pretty sure it's the same. A great place to sort of get your questions answered coming at this as a new candidate would be if you clicked on that bottom left corner where it says registering a committee and filer. So let's pretend we're clicking that. Next slide, please. And you'll get a screen that looks a little like this. There's a drop-down menu that allows you to choose sort of what you're doing, and then it's going to start pointing you in the direction of the appropriate rules and obligations you might need to follow. And so in this case, it's, well, what kind of committee or filer do you want to know more about? And you might say you're a candidate running for office, and then click next. Next slide, please. And then you'll get presented with another question. Do you have an OrStar account or not? If yes, it'll give you instructions specific to already having one. If no, it'll give you other instructions to make that account. But that's kind of how that works, right? It's just a nice starting point to get that information. It's not going to answer every question for you, but it is going to give point you in the right direction. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's that final slide. If you said that you already had an account, it's going to give you these step-by-step instructions, descriptions of a candidate committee, and just some basic overview of those rules. Next slide, please. The next place to look is the manuals themselves. I know they're thick, they can be a little hard to read, but they are very, very important to the process of complying with state campaign finance laws. They'll include all of the obligations, all of the deadlines, all of the details, and even more. And there's good examples and descriptions in there. We really do try to write them to be, usable by the general public. Next slide, please. You can find them pretty easily on our website using the green bar on the left. You can find the manuals, forums, tutorials, and elections law page. And then within there, you'll have the campaign finance section. I always recommend bookmarking this page because this is, again, sort of home base for finding these documents. You have the campaign finance manual itself. You have the transaction filings quick guide, which is just sort of a snapshot of what the campaign finance manual tells you specifically about what buttons to press when you're adding a transaction to the system. And then there's the user manuals, which just, again, give you the buttons you need to press in those various activities. Next slide. Next, I'll point out political communications disclosures. This is the paid for buys that I kind of glossed over a second ago. sos.oregon.gov/disclosures will give you a more in-depth description of what those actual requirements are. Next slide, please. And that's what this looks like. So it'll tell you sort of who's required, who's exempt, what kind of disclosures I might have to do, what's considered required to be in that disclosure, what happens if things go wrong. There's a lot of really good details and, again, some solid examples on there. So this is a good place to hang out and chew on a little bit anytime you start doing media work. Next slide, please. And then finally, and I always, I want to brag about this, is give us a call. Our team here in the office is extremely responsive. We have a whole dedicated staff of campaign finance specialists that will, be thrilled to answer your questions. They'll stay on the phone for 30 minutes, an hour with you if necessary, just to walk through everything. I think what's even cooler than that is once you file a committee, you'll actually be assigned to a specific campaign finance specialist. And that person will be the one who reviews your transactions. They'll get to know you by name. They're going to know exactly what's going on. And if you call them every week, they won't mind, right? They're gonna be your best resource. And so I really strongly recommend using that because the folks who call us the most often are the ones that are least likely to make mistakes. We're going to help you find those mistakes before they happen. We're going to pass you in the right direction. As it goes with the government, we can't tell you what to do, but we can tell you sort of what you might want to do, if that makes sense. And then finally, you can email us as well, orstar-support.sos@sos.oregon.gov. There's a good government email for you. it gets to the same exact people. So 2 ways to do the same exact thing. And I think that's really it. So if you have more questions, go ahead and throw them in the chat and I'll try to ask them out, but those resources are going to be really helpful. And yeah, Leah, I'll send it past you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I'm not seeing any other questions in the Q&A right now. So I'm going to move us on to the next slide with some good news, which is we're right at 3:30. So I'm going to move us forward to just wrapping everything up. So here's the contact information for everyone that's presented here. They are happy to answer any questions. Also, you'll see a QR code on here that asks you to take a post-event survey. Within that survey, there's going to be space for you to ask any further questions. So if you come up with any now, or as you continue to assimilate this information a little bit more, feel free to put it in that survey and we'll make sure that someone gets back to you with an answer. With that, since we are just a little bit over at 3:30, I am going to close out our meeting and say thank you all so much for attending. And we look forward to talking to you soon. Goodbye.